In this video, I'm going to show you exactly why some landing pages convert up to 15% of their website traffic, while others struggle to get any leads or sales. Because after 15 years, my agency has designed over 100,000 web pages for hundreds of different clients. And over that period of time, it's become obvious that companies are making the same mistakes. They're spending thousands of dollars per month driving traffic to their site through some sort of marketing like SEO or paid ads, yet when visitors land on their page, they just leave. And that's because they're not structuring them the right way. Now, after years of building landing pages and studying what actually makes them convert, I've narrowed it down to 6 main sections. And I'm about to break down each one of them for you so that by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what your landing page needs to do to start converting more of the traffic it's already getting. Now, before we jump into the details, you first need to understand what separates a good landing page from a bad one, because most companies build landing pages that look professional but completely fail at converting traffic into leads. You see, every person visiting your website is making split-second decisions whether they stay or they leave. And if your landing page makes it too hard for them to figure out what you do and why it matters, they're gone, which is exactly what most landing pages do. But good ones do the exact opposite. It guides a visitor through a logical flow that builds trust and makes their next action, working with you, the obvious choice. And the difference between landing pages that convert and ones that don't has very little to do with having the best design. Instead, it's mostly about having the right structure and understanding exactly what your visitors need to see in order to convert into a customer. So let me show you a real life example of what I mean. All right, so let's take a look at 2 landing pages. So both of these landing pages are for SaaS products. The SaaS products are focused on auto repair shops. So basically tools that kind of help auto repair shops manage their operations, marketing, sales, etc. One example, we have Auto Vitals, which is a client of ours, and then we have Identifix, who is a competitor of Auto Vitals. So both of these companies are trying to hit the same audience, same general customer, same size of customer, but 2 very different approaches in terms of their landing pages. So landing page for the Auto Vital shop, and we'll focus on this a little bit more later in the video when we're talking about the upper third, but there's a lot going on in this upper third that is kind of working in harmony to help really create that instant connection with a prospect. So just in terms of a visual design perspective, the headline, very clear, very dominant, very noticeable. Call to action, very clear. On the right hand side, you can see that there's a image that represents aspects of the product itself. That image is clear. You can clearly see the information that's being held in there, and that's really effective. In the other example, if we take a look at the heading that they have here, a couple things. So the dominant headline is actually not the headline that has most of the information in it. The call to action is prominent, but we'll talk a little bit more about the effectiveness of it. And then on the right hand side, we have an image that shows a device or shows the product in a device, but you can't actually see the details that are going on there, right? And I think that the combination of those things right off the bat aren't necessarily setting up the right eye flow or first impression that one would look for from one of these pages. If we jump back to the Auto Vitals example and we talk a little bit more tactically about some of what's going on here, in terms of the headline, so calling out, this is for serious shops and this is serious results, right? So if I'm a customer and I'm looking at one of these products, I'm probably a certain level of maturity with my shop that I'm like, yeah, I need to make an improvement. It's also gratifying to me from a psychological level that I'm being called serious by this company, right? Like they're identifying me and they're saying, yep, I'm actually in the business of doing business. So, there's some psychological stuff going on there that I think is positive. And then serious results talks to what people are looking for, right? Like it's immediately results focused off of the bat in the copy itself. Then followed up with the subheadline, which does a little bit more of the heavy lifting in terms of explaining what the product does, from DVI to marketing, everything you need to run a more profitable, transparent, and scalable shop. Again, talking to very clear benefits that one would get from using this product, which is awesome. As your eye continues to move down the page, the call to action here is to get a demo, and it's actually not just a link that brings you to a separate form. You can just plug your email in here and it'll automatically sign you up for a demo, which is quite nice. It takes a friction step out of it. Then there's a little bit of social proof in the way of this testimonial that's essentially backing up the statements that were previously made. So from Steve, total game changer for my shop. There's no better system out there for DVIs, dispatching, and reporting, right? So we're saying in marketing copy, this is a great solution for DVI, marketing, everything you need to be more profitable, transparent, and scalable. And then immediately backing up with third-party social proof that's saying the same exact thing from somebody else's perspective. There's a lot of value and a lot of power into that. On the right-hand side, you're then using imagery that connects to the points that are being made in the copy itself. So there's a little graphic that highlights a repair order price. There's something that's highlighting customer retention rate. There's something that's highlighting status in terms of where somebody's at in the process. So these images are directly connected back to what is being communicated here. So in this one section alone, there's so much value that's being presented here. You might want to continue to go down lower on the page and engage with that, but for all intents and purposes, somebody could just see this section and then just immediately go and reach out. Let's kind of look at the other page in comparison just to see how that stacks up, right? So introducing Shop Central, okay. The only cloud-based all-in-one shop management solution for single-use and multi-shop operators. So this describes what it does, but it doesn't necessarily describe what it does for me, which is a key difference from the other landing page. Another thing to note is the call to action just says learn more. And generally speaking, learn more is the worst call to action that you can put on a page because it doesn't actually say anything. It just lets you know that there's a link. And ideally, you want to have call to actions that are giving you an indication of what the next step is. I like to think of them less as call to actions and call to intention. So learn more in this case actually doesn't bring you to a conversion step. If I click on this button, it'll just bring me to another landing page with more long form information on it. So that's another missed opportunity, right? Like we want to try to capture interest when interest is due. Other thing, and I think I touched on this a little bit earlier, is the visual here is not necessarily doing a lot to drive the point home. So it's kind of just there and you can see that there's software, but it's not necessarily doing its job in terms of connecting the software to any of the language or really showing me what it can do. It's just kind of, a vague image. So these two examples, again, similar product, same audience, very different execution. You let me know which one you would prefer to buy from. Now that you know what makes a good landing page, let's get into how you actually build one for yourself. And essentially, there are 6 main sections that you need to include. But to make this video a little easier to follow, I've broken it down into 3 main parts, the upper, middle, and lower third. And of these 3, the upper third is the most important because it's the first thing visitors see when they land, which means it's also the one part of your landing page that has the biggest impact on whether they keep reading or they bounce. If the upper third doesn't keep them around, nothing that comes after it really matters. So it needs to be rock solid, which means it needs to accomplish 2 main goals. First, it needs to grab a visitor's attention by clearly telling them what you do and why it matters. And second, it needs to guide them to a primary action that you want them to take. When you achieve these 2 goals, it creates what I call instant clarity, which means the moment someone lands on your page, they immediately know they're in the right place and what to do next. And that makes them all the more likely to stick around and find out more about you. Now, with that said, let me show you what this looks like in practice. All right, for this example of the upper third of the page, I've chosen Shooks. They're a client of ours. They're a learning management system for frontline workers. So think of, your McDonald's, Subways, etc.'s of the world. They are actually the training tool for these organizations to be able to get their people up to speed really, really quickly and get them to do things the way that is going to be equitable for the company, equitable for customers. So, they want to put together something that's going to not just speak to learning management, but learning management for this specific sub niche of learning management. So in this header, similar structure to what we were referencing earlier with auto vitals, right? There's a clear dominance and hierarchy from a visual perspective of what you're looking at. The headline clearly separates from the sub headline. The imagery is engaging and branded and connected back to what's being said in the copy itself. There's a clear call to action and there's a clear secondary call to action. We'll talk about that in a second. But in terms of the headline itself, building skills, driving performance, delivering impact, all aspirational things that their prospective customers are striving towards. And then the sub-headline that kind of gets more into the meat of what they offer is talking about, outcome-led AI engineering learning. Shooks ensures frontline employees grow with purpose. So individual growth translates to measurable business performance. So they're talking about what they do, and then again, they're connecting it to the outcomes that a business can expect. Primary call to action and secondary call to action, for those who are not familiar with the terms, primary call to action is the main thing you want somebody to do. The secondary call to action is kind of a low friction alternate path to eventually to do the main step you want them to do, but they might need a little bit more warming up or figuring out. So in this case, the primary call to action, get a demo, super clear, right? Like I'm going to click this button, I'm going to schedule a demo, I know exactly what I'm getting before I click it, or I can learn more about the Shooks difference. So again, get a demo, super clear. You can easily and will easily see other brands use something like learn more as the secondary call to action, but how much more powerful is discover the Shooks difference than learn more, right? Like both might functionally have the same purpose, but one gives gives you a lot more context about what you're going to expect than the other. And I think that adds a lot more value. Another thing to note with the imagery, so there's a couple things going on. So there's this brand motif with that graphic element in the background, but then the imagery itself, like it's including a lifestyle image of, this could be a frontline worker at a sub shop or a bakery or what have you, but then it's also connecting it to aspects of the tool itself that are highlighting key things that are going to be important to training. So a lot going on in just this little package. And then also, not to overlook it, immediately you're getting social proof on this page too, right? Like I'm looking at this list of logos here and I recognize all of these companies. So again, that's psychologically telling the prospective customer, oh yeah, they work with, if they can handle Subway, they can handle me, or they work with other organizations that are just like mine, right? So a lot happening within just the first couple of seconds of entering this page, but letting people know exactly what the company does, building that initial rapport, connecting it to the product, connecting it to the outcomes, and then combining that with trust. All of these things are going to help somebody want to continue to explore more, or just jump ahead and schedule that demo because they already feel like this is going to be the right fit for them. Now, if you want a landing page that actually converts without spending months trying to understand and implement all this yourself, you can book a call using the link below. We've used this exact framework to create over 500 high converting websites for companies like NBC Sports, Live Nation, and Boston Dynamics. So if you'd like to see how we can do the same for you, just book a call below. But either way, now that you've grabbed your visitors' attention, the next step is to educate and build trust, because at this point, people are most likely curious about your company, but not totally convinced about why they should work with you or buy from you. So you need to give them reasons to believe that you're the right choice. And this is where most landing pages either overwhelm visitors with too much information or don't provide enough substance to overcome their objections. But you don't have to fall into either of these extremes, because there is a middle third of your landing page that has one specific job to do: to systematically address all the doubts running through your visitors' minds. That means answering 3 important questions. Do other credible companies trust you? What makes you different? And how does it work for a business like mine? When you structure this section the right way, you're not just pushing for sales. Instead, you're guiding visitors through a logical journey that builds confidence in your business, so that once they reach that lower third, they're already as convinced as they possibly could be. So let me walk you through how to set each one of these sections up. All right, so for the next section of the landing page, I wanted to jump back to the example we were talking about earlier with auto vitals and kind of just focus in on some of the lower sections on that page, because I think it does an equally good job of nailing that down. So one of the first things that you see in that next section is going to be the why auto vitals is the best solution for your shop. And where this differs from where a lot of other brands go is that it's leading with business objectives and then it's connecting it back to the product itself. So increasing customer satisfaction, driving customer loyalty, increasing shop efficiency and profitability, attracting new customers. These are all things that a business wants to achieve. And then it's using that as the kind of like the gateway to then connect it back to the product. So here, increasing customer satisfaction, then they're talking about their advanced DVI and how that, helps them accomplish that. So again, it's using the business goals as the leading factor, and then it's connecting it back to what the product can do. Also, again, in this section, this persistent get a demo is available, right? So if I read this and I'm convinced, I am just one click away from getting a demo here or clicking the top right and getting a demo there. Then as I continue to scroll down, this next section is continuing to reinforce the value of the product, but it's doing it in a slightly different way. So here, when we're talking about things like digital vehicle inspections, right? So this is a feature of the product. It's talking about, in real terms that are relatable, like customers don't want a sales pitch. One of the predominant things that we learn when we're talking to these shops, and Auto Vitals kind of resonate the same, is like people who run auto shops hate doing selling. They would much rather prefer to do the actual work. So having a tool that kind of lowers the barrier and allows that to happen more easily and fluidly, huge benefit. So kind of addressing that head on and knowing that that's a major pain point for those types of customers is a really good way of kind of opening up this section and building some of that rapport with that potential customer. The other thing that's going on here is that they are using metrics that are specific to how this is going to improve the quality of business for this function. So 76% increase in job job approvals, that's huge, right? So 3 out of 4 more opportunities are won just because of this tool. That's, you can do the math in terms of what that means for a business, right? And then a 27% average increase in repair order on top of that, crazy. Like if you're a shop owner and you see those numbers, that's gonna pique your interest. So again, we're taking, a line item of what this can do, but we're contextualizing it in a way that brings a lot more value to the business itself. And then the other thing, similar to what was going on in that initial section that we're talking about earlier, we're bringing visuals that are relevant and kind of show a glimpse of what that product can do. So this approach is then repeated a few times, focusing on different areas in the site. So, workflow automation, again, like key metrics, like an hour saved per day, you can do the math in terms of how that would add up for a shop. 30% increase in capacity, you can do 30% more work with the same staff, crazy. And then same thing like this section in terms of customer relation management. So again, being able to manage your customers better, being able to, handle all that with ease, connecting it to stats, connecting it to imagery. So super effective way of bringing this together in terms that the business owners understand, in terms that is relatable, and just show what they could do to the bottom line. And then last but not least on this same page is highlighting an actual real world example of how this is being applied and how is this being effective for, a customer just like the person who might be visiting this website. So again, showing the differences and not just having a visual, right? But like giving them a glimpse of what the results are with the key opportunity to then go read the full story. So all of this is building trust, and it's building third-party validation in a few different ways. You're using statistics strategically to show people the outcomes that you can expect. You're showing real-world examples of this in practice. A lot of value happening here to build that rapport with a prospective customer. Now, even with a strong upper and middle third of your landing page, there's still one more critical part to get right, because not everyone converts at the top of the page. In fact, a lot of qualified visitors are the ones who actually scroll all the way through. They've consumed your entire message, they understand your value, and they're on the edge of making decisions. Now, this is where the lower third comes in. Not to introduce new information, but to simply confirm that you're the right choice and push visitors to action. But here's where most companies mess this up. They either repeat the same generic content from earlier or just slap a footer on the page and call it done. And in the end, they lose their most engaged visitors right at the finish line. So let me show you how to structure a lower third of your page the right way. All right, so for the final section, we're actually going to use our website as an example here. And really, in order to make this final section the most effective, you need to accomplish 2 things. You need to bust any final objections that might exist, and then you need to deploy what I refer to as a call to inaction. So essentially, what is at stakes if they do nothing at all? Because ultimately, doing nothing is going to be easier than doing something. So you want to give them a little extra urgency to make that final step. So a great way to accomplish addressing any sort of objections that might happen is using something like an FAQ section really strategically. So here you can see that we are addressing things for specifically a SaaS buyer in our FAQs. So things like, how much does a SaaS website cost? What's the timeline? Do you help with landing pages and conversion optimization? And what makes Humor different? These are all questions that often arise in sales calls. It's the best way to identify what those objections might be, and then just address them head on in an FAQ section and have that readily available. So that would be step 1 to making this more successful. And then step 2 is the call to inaction. So in the call to inaction, what you want to do is you want to make it really clear. If they do nothing, they're going to be worse off than if they do something about it. So here we have a headline and a subheadline kind of combined together to make that happen. Again, the right website turns innovation into revenue. Every SaaS buyer gets confused, clicks away, and struggles to see your values and missed opportunity, and you're paying for those clicks. After working with us, you won't just have a sleeker website, you'll have a demand generation engine that clicks with both users and investors, and a platform designed to grow with you. And then making sure that you're reinforcing your primary and your secondary call to action in this section as well is really what's needed. So by adding those 2 things into your landing pages, what you'll end up doing is you'll see more people that typically would drop out at this bottom part of the process actually start to engage and take those next steps, because you've given them them those final nudges. You've answered whatever lingering questions they might have, and you've encouraged them to do something rather than do nothing at all. And that's exactly how you structure a landing page that actually converts. But here's the thing, the big difference between just understanding the framework and actually implementing it in a way that gets you results. So if you want to skip the trial and error stage of figuring it out for yourself, you can just book a call now. We've built hundreds of high converting landing pages, and we've helped companies like BetterCloud achieve a 84% increase in leads. So if you want to see if we can do something similar for you, just book a call using the link below.